Welcome, everyone, to this week's XojoTalk podcast. And my guest this time is Tim Dietrich, a new member of the Xojo developer community. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. We've been having a lot of these XojoTalk podcasts lately, and almost all of them have had people that have been using Xojo for a really long time. And I thought it would be great to bring on someone who's been using Xojo for a very short time and get a little bit different perspective and feedback on that. And so, Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you came to use Xojo?
Well, I'm a database developer. I've been using the FileMaker platform for a very long time. That's really been my sort of bread and butter, my core technology, if you will. And I've done just about everything you can imagine with FileMaker. Last year, I released a book on it and released a whole bunch of open source solutions for the platform.
Nice.
And it got to be, I guess, towards the fall, late last year. And, some opportunities had started to come up and some other interests had started to, come to mind for me. And I realized that, the FileMaker platform, it couldn't do what I needed it to do to kind of complete those projects. And that's certainly not a knock to the platform by any means. It just, it's not a good fit for what I wanted to do, which was really to develop mobile apps. So I sort of went on this, wasn't expecting it to turn into this, but it sort of turned into a quest to find the perfect development environment. And I guess I pretty quickly realized that, it was going to be a much longer quest than I imagined. So it's really how things started. I guess, to talk a little bit about why FileMaker just couldn't do what I needed it to do. Again, I was really interested in developing mobile solutions or true mobile apps, I should say. And while FileMaker has, they have an answer to that to some extent with the product called FileMaker Go. It's really not a good fit for developing, a compiled, truly native solution.
Right.
You can't take something that you've created with FileMaker and throw it up on the App Store and start selling it. And that was really what I wanted to do, both for myself, for some personal applications that, I want to develop. And also I have some clients that are asking for that as well. So Go isn't a good fit. And so that's really how things got started.
Yeah, we hear that a lot because, everyone's asking for mobile stuff these days. And, you get a project somehow. And even if you're not even building it for mobile first, they'll often be coming up, well, can you add mobile capability to it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, I've been friends with Hal Gumbert, who you interviewed recently on the podcast, and he encouraged me to look at Xojo, which I did. I knew Xojo, just in passing from when it was, real basic. And so I dove into Xojo, and honestly, it was kind of like love at first sight. I really enjoyed using it right off the bat. Everything just kind of clicked. The IDE is really well thought out. The language is well thought out. And in just a very short amount of time, I actually had what I think was an app ready to go, ready to be submitted to the App Store. Now, granted, it wasn't anything, crazy. It wasn't like, Evernote or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. But still, it's important to get to a point where you can create and accomplish something with it.
Right. And I got to that point very quickly. Again, everything just kind of clicked with me. I had Hal to kind of fall back on and say, hey, well, how do you do this? What about that? So he gave me some good advice and some good tips. So that was extremely helpful. It wasn't like I was on my own with it. And also found the community just to be just amazing. The forums are great. I love the fact that we have this developer evangelist, that I'm speaking with here today. It's just, I think just a really, really nice feature of the community and the platform. So I felt really good about Xojo, but, we talk a few minutes before the podcast, and I mentioned to you that I feel like I'm always looking for well, what else is out there, and I felt like I needed to explore some options as well, especially knowing that whatever I decided on as far as the development environment goes that I was going to be using, I feel like I'm probably going to be using it for a long time, so it needs to be right. It needs to feel. I need to feel good about it. So there was that, and then I guess when I first started looking at Xojo last fall, you guys had just released iOS support. So there were, it was brand new, but it was great right out of the box. But there were some things that it couldn't do and hadn't been addressed yet with declares that are available now. And I felt like I needed to do that. I needed to be able to hit the hardware, the camera and the microphone and stuff like that. So I started to think I should look at other options, and that's what I ended up doing. Ironically, so I'll do the spoiler alert thing. I come back to Xojo, obviously, but that's where things all started. And I had also convinced myself, this is kind of funny, but I had convinced myself that I needed to support more than just iOS. When in reality, I'm a Mac guy. I honestly don't care whether I ever develop a mobile app for Android or not. Of course, 10 minutes after this podcast, I'll get a call from a client that says, hey, I've got to have an Android app. But, I had convinced myself at that point that I did need to be able to develop for everything. I needed Android support. So I went off, further down the road on my quest, and I could go into all the other details if you want.
I'll include. You wrote a very nice and lengthy blog post covering essentially your quest, which is you start with Xojo, and then you're like, well, I want to make sure I look at some other things, and then you covered all the other tools you investigated and tried out, and then how they all had pretty things you didn't like in one way or another, and you ended up coming back around to Xojo. And I'll make sure there's links to this post in the show notes for this podcast. But yeah, that's one of the things that had said, Tim's going to make a pretty good guy to talk here, because he got a different perspective than a lot of people that have been using Xojo for a really, really long time. He's been running it for less than it's like 6 months maybe. And
yeah, probably a little less. Well, yeah, I guess going on maybe 4 months since I really started this journey or whatever. But yeah, I ended up looking at a bunch of other options. I looked at live code, which I was a little more familiar with than Xojo. There were things that I really liked about it. I love its HyperCard or HyperTalk roots. That's something I'm familiar with and feel pretty good about. There's a lot to like about live code, but at the same time, I felt like it tries to be all things to all people, and kind of doesn't necessarily work well with creating solutions for any one platform, like exceptionally. It was at that point that I realized that I really felt like whatever tool I was going to decide on, whatever environment I was going to decide on, it needed to at least be able to really create just amazing iOS applications. And I felt like I wasn't going to be able to get that with live code. And I think it's kind of interesting. There's another Xojo developer, Bob Keeney.
Yes. Yep. He was a guest on this podcast for podcast number 2.
Well, it was interesting because I think just last week, I believe it was, he posted on his blog about kind of reaching some of the same conclusions about live code that I had. We had actually exchanged some emails prior to that, prior to him posting that blog post. And one of the things I said to him was, the stack of cards metaphor was extremely intuitive. It's easy to understand. But that's about where it stops for me with live code. The language is it's English-like, and so you think that it's going to be easy to understand and easy to pick up, and it just never didn't click with me.
So, what is your background in programming? You said you've been doing FileMaker for a long time. Have you used other programming tools before that? Do you have a programming background at all?
Yeah, I mean, I've been programming since I was in fourth grade, so for a very, very long time. Everything from my first computer was a TRS-80, so I'm going to like show my age here, right? But I started like most people back then. I started with BASIC. I was lucky enough to have an Apple IIe at some point, so I was doing Turbo Pascal, and I went to college and studied at a survey of programming languages and did COBOL and all. I spent a lot of time doing some web development work with Cold Fusion and Perl. But these days, most of my work is in FileMaker and in PHP. And now Xojo. So, I've seen a lot, and in this quest, to find the perfect development environment, I've looked at even more. So yeah, I had some things to compare live code to, and it really is unlike any other language that that I've come across. And
yeah, it appeared so. I mean, the language standpoint, everything is unusual. A lot of people tell us Xojo just feels more approachable because, it is familiar. You can easily come from another language into Xojo without a lot of difficulty. And then if you have to use another language for something else, the stuff you learn with Xojo, its object-oriented design and everything translates very well to many other languages. So, it's just a useful tool all around in that manner.
I think you're right. That was one of the things as I was looking at live code. It was interesting because I'm trying to encourage my son to learn programming. And so I thought, well, this will be a great way for him to learn to program because, again, it's got that English-like scripting language. And, there's a lot of great resources that live code makes available for learning to program. And yet at the same time, as somebody who I guess has been formally trained in programming and in development, it didn't work for me. I didn't think I'd be able to really help him much with it. And it just seemed like a better investment, both for myself and for him, to actually use something more, I want to say professional, and that's not to say that live code isn't professional, but to use something that is more standardized, I guess. And I think Xojo kind of fits that bill. So I also ended up looking at, once I gave up on live code and had kind of come back around the realization that I really only needed to support iOS, I looked at Swift, which, is also brand new. The timing was kind of perfect. And it's a beautiful language. I mean, it's weird to use beautiful as an adjective for a programming language, but it really is. I mean, it's just, it's Apple. And if you can imagine taking their design aesthetic and applying it to a programming language, that's what it feels like. But wow, was it hard to wrap my head around. And the language is beautiful, but you're kind of in Xcode. And so it didn't click.
Yeah. Well, Xcode is a little intimidating, to use a polite word, I suppose, when you jump into it, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. And Swift may be a simpler language than something like Objective-C, but you still got to use it to talk to all the Cocoa frameworks, which are still largely geared towards Objective-C. So there's a bit of a pretty steep learning curve there for people. So yeah, I mean, and it's great that Apple's making just in general it easier for people to program. That's kudos to them, but it's still not nearly as easy as some other tool.
No, I mean, I think it seemed like it could be easier, and I don't know. It left a lot to be desired. So I gave up on that, and then I guess kind of the last thing that I looked at was looking at doing the hybrid apps. That are like with PhoneGap, for example. I spent a couple of long days and nights looking at that because I do have a web development background, and I thought, well, maybe this is the way to go. And, I don't want to set off any wars or anything because I know there are some people who swear by the hybrid app methodology and the fact that, that's the way to go. But it felt just limiting to me. I felt like I was back in web development again with all the limitations of the browser. Right. I know that there are ways to work around that, and things like PhoneGap have done a great job of sort of bridging the gap, no pun intended. But I felt like that I was trying to take the easy way out with that and wasn't going to get the full power that something like Xojo would give me.
That always struck me as a little hacky, combining two things together that weren't meant to be combined in that manner. And yeah, it does seem to work, but
there are some really, interesting hybrid apps that are out there. And I know some guys who do that kind of work, and, they do a great job of making it feel like, and I can't even really say that, make them feel like they're native apps, because I guess you can make the argument that they are, but there's just, I don't know. There's something about it. Again, it feels like you're trying to take a shortcut and, the easy way out. And that's not what I was looking to do. I really needed the power of something like Xojo, but I was also looking for something that would feel comfortable, reliable. And that's really what I ended up finding with Xojo. Hal patiently watched me go through this journey. He was curious to see, what I would end up deciding on. But all along, I think he knew, he's going to come back to Xojo. So, he was right. And, so there's 3-4 months, I can't say down the drain, but because it was time well spent, and I've kind of got it out of my system. Now I'm ready to dig into Xojo. So.
Right. Yeah. No, well, that can be good. You get any lingering doubts out of your mind. Oh, should I look at this? Well, you did look at it, and you picked what you think is going to work best for you, and you'll be more comfortable with that decision. And now you can just get stuff done rather than worrying about things.
It's funny, I know I'm not the only one who is really trying to figure this all out. I've been getting a bunch of emails I had prior to kind of reaching the Xojo decision. I was getting emails from people saying, hey, we're kind of in the same boat. We're looking for, a development environment to do mobile in. And these aren't FileMaker people. These are just people that finding me on the web, that, found some of my older blog posts. So I think it's kind of a common desire right now, to find something that works. And I feel fortunate enough that it took me 3 or 4 months to reach the decision that I did, but at the same time, I'm glad I did. It was, like I said, time well spent. So.
That's awesome. Well, we love having new people join, and iOS certainly has increased a lot of the newer people asking questions in the forum and that sort of stuff. So certainly a lot of people are checking it out, hopefully realizing how quick it is to throw together an iOS app, and people that perhaps, were just completely unable to do it using any other tool.
Well, I have to say, the videos that you've been releasing were extremely helpful to me, both when I first started looking at Xojo and then when I kind of came back to it, especially some of the iOS oriented videos that you're doing. The beginning of the year was pretty much, all iOS videos right off the bat, just because, we had a larger catalog of videos for the other stuff. But iOS, we needed to kind of get people up and running quickly. And I'm not typically, a visual learner. I'm the kind of guy who picks up a book and likes to just dig into the code, start writing. But, what you were doing or have been doing with those videos, I kind of get my iPad set up over here, and I've got my development computer over here, and what's he doing there? And so it's that has even further made learning Xojo and the kind of particulars of iOS a lot easier. So thank you for that. Well, hey, I'm glad to do those. They've been getting a lot of views on YouTube, so hopefully others are finding them helpful to kind of get up and running. And we're still working through putting together all the docs for iOS, because everything is brand new, and I'm still learning things myself. I haven't done significant iOS work, using other tools. So I got to learn iOS and then learn how it's implemented in Xojo and use it a bit, and then figure out how I can explain that to people. So throughout the year, we're going to be continuing to beef up all that iOS stuff with more and better docs, more and better videos, more and better stuff in Xojo for iOS, so that the less reliance on declares. Should be great. You've got the developer conference coming up pretty soon. Is a lot of the focus of that going to be on iOS, or is it kind of be spread out? It's definitely spread out. Yeah, our developer conference, the Xojo Developer Conference in 2015, is at the end of April in Austin, Texas, and certainly it is the place to go if you do want to learn something, because not only do you get access to the entire Xojo staff there to ask your favorite question and get them sitting right next to you and showing you how to do something and stuff you might not otherwise get. But we've got like 30-something sessions. They're not all iOS by any stretch. They're scattered all over the board. And we have a lot in the community that do presentations. Now, I think all of the iOS sessions are being done by staff, mostly because when we requested people to submit presentations,
I don't think iOS was even in beta yet.
Oh, wow.
So none of those from the customers could have been iOS sessions. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do all those this year, but I suspect we're going to get a lot of people at those sessions. A lot of people are going to be asking questions about that. I think having looked at the schedule that just went out, I have the first session after the keynote on the iOS overview. That'll probably be pretty well attended, I suspect, with a lot of people wanting to actually see an iOS app live, see how it's different. And there are some stuff that's different for people that have been using Xojo a long time. So yeah, there'll be quite a few things related to iOS at the conference, but it's not just iOS and only iOS. You know, we got a lot of people that have been using desktop stuff for years and have some great tips and web stuff and all over the board.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a great conference, and Hal's been kind of prodding me. You know, are you going to go? Are you going to go? Are there any seats left, or are you sold out?
We're not sold out yet, but yeah, last year we did sell out, last year I don't remember exactly when we sold out, but we did run out of space, and we still have some space left. Yeah, you definitely should go if you can swing the timing and everything, because it is a blast. It's a lot of fun. As you already observed on the forum, the community is wonderful, and in person, the community is even more wonderful than the forums. I mean, every forum can get a little, cranky from time to time. Yeah. But in person, great conversations. You get to just meet a lot of people, talk about what they're doing. The sessions are great. The places to hang out afterwards and chat with people are a lot of fun. It's exhausting for all of us, but it is. We do look forward to it every year.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good investment in time too. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking about it.
All right. Well, speaking of things that happened today, conference related, Apple did a big keynote earlier before we recorded this podcast. And unfortunately, Tim missed it. I don't know how he could do this. He said he was an Apple guy earlier. What sort of Apple guy doesn't listen to a keynote from Apple?
I know. Well, we started homeschooling my son at the beginning of this year. And, I've tried to keep be very good about from 1 to 2 o'clock every day is, math class. And it just figures, right? Like I almost made the exception today. But no, I stuck with it, and I figure I'll watch it. There'll be a gazillion posts online about what they announced and what they didn't.
Right. Yeah. What they didn't. Yeah. I think it really is only like 3 things. They announced a lower price. They lowered the price in Apple TV. They announced a new.
It away now?
Yeah, it's going to be in cereal boxes pretty soon, I think. And they announced a new MacBook, which I think was a little surprising. I think most people thought they might wait till summer at their developer conference for them to announce. But they announced a new MacBook laptop, which is lighter and smaller and all that, and thinner. That was a big thing, thinner. When Tim Cook came out holding the laptop, he's like, "Can you see it?" That's what he said. It's so thin. Can you see it? Is what he said. It was funny. Wow. And then of course they spent most of it yakking on about the Apple Watch, showing all kinds of apps on it and demos and stuff, which is interesting. I personally wait and see. I don't wear a watch, and the watch isn't at a point yet where it makes me say, "Ooh, now I have to wear a watch." So
I feel the same way about it. Actually, when they announced it a while back, I blogged about it. I think the blog title was something like, do people really still wear watches? Because I haven't worn one in, I don't know, 15 years maybe?
Yeah,
I can't remember. It would feel weird to have it on my wrist. Well, I want to know what time it is. And, I've got my iPhone where I'm sitting in front of a computer and the time's apparent to me. So, and I realize that, we're talking about much more than just something to look down at to get the
right.
time.
Yeah, their demo. I mean, he spent a large amount of time discussing time, which I thought was kind of funny because it's just a clock, but I mean, it can do a lot more. Right. And but I remember when the iPhone was first announced. At that time, I don't necessarily think I even carried a cell phone around with me all the time. So I was like, I don't really need a $800 cell phone or whatever, and. So, I mean, like I said, for this sort of thing, it's a wait and see for me. But someone like my wife, who does wear a watch and does have one of those activity trackers she wears too, is like loving this thing. She can't wait to go check one out and see what it's all about. So I'm sure they'll probably do pretty well with these things because they look slick and they do seem to have a lot of functionality. The pricing is quite broad, though. It goes from, I get my notes here, $350 up to 10,000 plus for the gold one.
So you're going to get the 10,000 one for Mother's Day, right? I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. They said that one's only available in limited quantity and only at select locations or something. They probably have to build in some sort of secure room for people to go look at that or something at the Apple store.
They'll sell out of them anyway. That's the thing, right?
Yeah. So the rumors had been predicting that watch would be that expensive just from a fashion standpoint, but that's still kind of nerds like us don't really care so much about that. We're a little more practical, and like $10,000, yeah, I could get a lot of Mac Pros for that. And I think I'd rather strap a Mac Pro to my wrist, I think, than.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's funny. I felt the same way that, like the wait and see approach that you described. I felt that way about the iPad, and I couldn't for the life of me imagine why I would need this other device, because at the time I looked at it as, another way to browse the web. And I thought, I do that all day, every day in front of my MacBook. Like, why would I need my iPad? And now it's funny, like I sort of half joked about this, that if I was ever walking down the street, somebody like held me up at gunpoint, I would say, look, you can have everything. Just please let me keep my iPad, because, I love the thing. You pry it from my cold, dead hand, It's so bad that my son actually calls it, he's got a nickname for it. He says it's my precious, from like Lord of the Rings.
Right.
So I'm guessing that, knowing Apple and knowing what they're good at, 3 years from now, maybe at a Xojo developer conference, you'll see me sporting my $10,000 gold, whatever. I want to call it iWatch, but I know that's not right.
Yeah. Tim Cook will fly out and personally correct you if you do that.
Yes. I still think they should call it that, though. The iWatch.
Well, I'm waiting for the day when they announce they're renaming the phone to just Apple Phone to match their new naming trend. I mean, they certainly get a lot of brand history with iPhone, but I imagine, much like luxury car makers and whatnot, they want to say the company name in front. You always say Mercedes and then some gibberish of numbers or BMW or something. So, and when people just say iPhone, you're not saying Apple. And, from a marketing standpoint, companies don't like that. So
right. Yeah,
it seems like eventually they'll change that. But you never know what Apple's going to do.
Well, so I know that, when I listened to Hal's podcast, he ended up kind of turning the tables on you a little bit and asking you a lot of questions. But I only have one question for you.
Only one question. Yeah, I've got a couple people that emailed me and said, I loved hearing Hal's podcast where he interviewed you. And he didn't have that many questions. But yeah, by all means, if you got questions, ask away.
Yeah, I'm joking. But with the announcement of the watch, are there plans for Xojo to be able to develop apps for the watch or to integrate with it, or like what would be involved in that?
Well, that's a good question as to what is involved. I mean, Apple at this point has only released the first version of their watch kit, which I haven't dug into it too deeply myself yet, but from the sounds of it, it just seems to be providing some way to create a UI that is displayed on the watch that allows that allows it to communicate back to an app running on a phone.
Okay.
So right now it doesn't seem like you can actually create an app that goes onto the watch itself. It just seems like the apps are actually on the phone and they're communicating to the watch in some manner. So it's almost like you're building a remote UI for an iPhone app. Mm-hmm. And I haven't done yet any digging to see if current Xojo iOS stuff is actually able to communicate with WatchKit. We're kind of still taking a wait and see. I mean, you don't even have one. I mean, you can download some stuff, I think, to play around with it, but there's not actual real devices or anything. And we don't know what's going to be next in the next version of the SDK. I mean, maybe they'll talk about that at WWDC, and then we'll see where that goes. I mean, they haven't even specifically said, what is the processor? Is that still an ARM derivative of some kind? They didn't announce anything today about storage or RAM or any of the tech specs that are in a watch that make you wonder, does it even have room to install apps? I mean, they've said you can put music and pictures on it. That would imply it has storage, but they completely mum on how much that is. Music can take up quite a bit of room, and pictures also. So a lot of mystery still remains, but certainly, we like to support the platforms that people want to use for stuff. And if it turns out that this watch thing is something that we get a lot of requests for and makes sense, I don't see why we wouldn't look at it. Like you had mentioned, the other one that everyone asks us about is Android. And, we can't do everything all at once. So, we look at what's there and then we'll figure out what the next logical thing is to do. But right now, as we tell everyone, we're focused on 64-bit because everyone's wanted that last year. And we're working our butts off to get that done.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think Hal has mentioned this before as well. But, it's refreshing to be working with a development company and a technology where the strategy and the long term, the roadmap for the platform or for the product is kind of laid out. It's nice to know that. It's nice for us to know, I think, as developers, what you guys are thinking, where you're headed.
It's funny when you say that because we do get a lot of flack from people saying we don't lay it out enough. And it's just like, well, can't lay out everything that we're thinking or planning on doing. I mean, plans change, things might take longer or less time than you think. I mean, you can give direction at a very high level, which I think we've done. And that's what we'll stick to. And then hopefully, we get that stuff done. Everyone's happy. Yeah. Those guys did what they said they're going to do, and then we can work on what we think is next. And then that's what we want to do. We want to make stuff that people want. I mean, I remember before I was working here many years ago, people would be clamoring that I guess it was Real Basic at the time, be able to build for Palm. Oh. And if we had spent a lot of time building that would have been a lot of wasted effort right now.
Yeah, I would think.
So, I mean, we've got to be a little cautious about some things, make sure we've gotten a lot of requests for Windows Phone, and just like, there's not a lot of return right now. There's not a lot of Windows Phone stuff. If it took us a long time to build that and then Microsoft just yanked the plug because they're not selling any, that wouldn't be great. So we got to make sure we, look at stuff carefully and choose where the market's going, what people are actually doing with it, that sort of stuff.
Right. Well, I like what I see. So, and if people think that, I don't know, that it's bad, it could be a lot worse. I'll put it that way.
Well, I remember when I was doing .NET development many years ago, I mean, Microsoft would come out with a new technology like every 6 months and say, this is the thing to use. And you'd start, you'd redesign your app to use this new thing. And then 6 months later, they'd say, we changed our mind. Don't use that anymore. We're yanking it. And you're just like, no, stop doing that, Microsoft. And that certainly got frustrating real quick. So it's always fun to be in the development world. Everything's changing all the time. And so you get always new things to learn about.
Yeah, it does keep us on our toes. That's for sure.
Well, one thing that I saw, and I think this came about on Twitter, I saw you were on a podcast, I don't know, a couple months ago, with another fellow, again, whose name I'm going to forget, but we'll have links in the show note, Kurt. Was it
Kirk Bowman of right? Mighty Data? Yeah.
Yeah, and you were on a podcast and you were discussing something. This is be related to people that do consulting type work. The podcast topic was on value-based pricing and how you deal with clients and how you price the projects that you're doing for your customers, for your clients. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about this because, before I started at Xojo, I did, consulting for like 4 years or so. And I struggled with that myself. Customers would often ask to price a project, just give them a one price to do the project. But most consultants seem to do hourly type billing. This is my rate. This is a rough estimate, but I bill you on the actual time, that sort of thing. And there's always been some debate as to which is better. And you were on that podcast and you had some interesting insights, which, it'd be nice to hear, but I think I'm going to end up echoing most of your insights. But so what were your thoughts on that? Because you were talking with Kirk, and he is like all in on this value stuff. And
yeah, he is, and it's interesting. I think he, in a lot of his podcasts, and I think on his website, he mentions how he sort of came to learn about value pricing. And we were both at the same conference. There was a FileMaker conference several years back, and there was a fellow developer there named Jonathan Stark, who has kind of moved on. He's now in the mobile space, brilliant guy. But he was part of sort of a group of people who were talking about how they price the work that they do. And Jonathan had said a bunch of things that I think got us all kind of thinking that, we needed to look at value pricing. And I kind of walked away from that it was one of those on-session type deals. It wasn't a formal session at the conference, but I kind of walked away from that and just, was curious about it. And I looked into it a little bit and just thought, I don't know. Like, I don't think I can make this work. And whereas Kirk was, I think, equally at first kind of, hesitant about it and wondered, and yet he totally has, taken this thing on. Like, that's what they use for it, at his company now. It's how they price things. And he's become a really strong advocate for it. And I'll be honest with you, I'm all over the fence with it. I'm all over the place with it. I still don't know. I would like to be able to say to you that, yeah, I think value pricing is the way to go, or that hourly pricing is the way to go. And I think in some of my blog posts and in the podcast that you referred to, the conclusion I've kind of reached is that there is no perfect way to price a project. I don't think that hourly is always the way to go. I don't know that value pricing is always the way to go. And it's easy to confuse value pricing with like a flat, like a project.
Right. Well, and
not the same.
Exactly. And that's more of what I think, when clients would come to me, they were more focused on, they wanted a fixed price.
Exactly.
Which is very different than a value price, because a fixed price is essentially a client telling you, I want to pay as little as possible and have you work as hard as you possibly can. And that rarely works out well for anybody, because, the scope is probably going to be changing, and then you're going to be cranky because you're doing extra work for them. They're going to be cranky because you're probably going to start asking to get paid for the extra work you're doing. And so that always, I thought, when I tried that a couple times, ended up being a battle that wasn't good for the relationship. And the value pricing is neat, but it's a lot more work, I think, to get to a point where you can convince the customer that the value is there, and they should, because essentially you're going to price the project way higher than what they're probably thinking. And so that you get there, a project that hourly might have been, measured in the thousands might be, 3 times that for a value price, because you're basing it on the value they're getting from it rather than the direct effort it took you to create it. And getting a customer to make that mind shift that is a good deal for both parties, that's a lot of work. And I've only been able to do that not even a handful, maybe a couple times.
I think it's easy to kind of start down the path of doing value pricing and then end up in a fixed price situation anyway. I think the key to making it work, from what I've been able to tell in talking to people like Kirk and reading about value pricing, it seems like communication is just absolutely critical. Good communication between you and the client. But it's a little bit more than that. Having good communication is going to be key to any project. It's
right. Oh, absolutely.
But I think it's more than that. It's also, there's got to be, to me, it seems like a really good relationship there already. Where you can speak candidly with the client and say, look, this thing I'm going to do for you, it might take me an hour to do, but you're going to make $100,000 in profit as a result of me making this one little minor change for you. Hey, sharing some of that with me. That's a kind of a strange conversation to have with somebody. It feels right.
Yeah, it's definitely a strange conversation. And that's what, when I was doing consulting, that's one thing I would always do, again, because you always, you see a lot of people that will be, hear from a potential client, and they ask for something, and then people just immediately turn around and send a quote with even like hourly rate or something like that. And that, to me, is like, all right, you just took the first wrong step. If you ever think you're going to go down the value price road, you completely took the wrong turn there. And the first, I always just did the initial, I would just email them and, well, what are you trying to do? How's this help? Well, how's your business work? And then there'd be a long series of emails, and I'd ignore any questions about what's this going to cost, what's going to take. And I would just say, well, I don't know enough information yet, or I'm trying to get an understanding or something like that. And that generally would work really well to build the relationship with the client, but it's still a whole nother level to be able to take it up to the value price estimate. And you still have to be comfortable too. It's because you're like, all right, well, I think this will realistically take me this much time based on what they're going to get out of it. There's this much difference in the pricing. Well, I'm going to give them a price that sounds kind of crazy to me, and I don't want to offend them. And it's tough.
Well, one of the things I learned from Kirk, and I think we talk about it in that podcast, because it was one of those sort of light bulb moments for me, and it shouldn't have been, is that I think in order to make that work, you almost have to charge for that discovery phase of the project. In other words, the job is actually started right at the point at which all those questions and answers start flying back and forth, because that's a huge part of making the project work. And it should be anyway, really. When you're doing the discovery work and you're putting together a proposal, there's some value that you're adding right there, right? And for years, I've been giving it away for free. And I've tried to change that to some extent, with some of the newer clients that I have. And I'm trying to back away a little bit from doing a lot of client work. But with some of the ones that I've been doing, I'm trying to actually get them to understand that, if I spend some time like really digging into their needs, that's going to ultimately end up in a better solution for them. A solution that would be great whether I end up developing it or they take the sort of blueprint that we come up with for their solution and take it to another developer.
Right.
So, I think that's part of it too. There's a lot more to it than just sitting down with the client and saying, hey, what's this thing really going to be worth to you?
Right. And cool. Even that, that's really hard to measure.
Yeah.
Even if you get the client that's on board with that, how can they come up with something that, especially if it's an internal app that they're using to run their business? It may not have direct things you can measure. So,
well, I think I mentioned that in the podcast, and I've certainly mentioned it in arguing against the value pricing model, which is that, I actually do have clients who are using solutions I developed, 12 years ago, that for the most part just run. I'm talking about solutions I developed that run on the SQL Server and Cold Fusion. They're browser-based solutions, and those things just continue to hum along. There's really nothing other than occasionally revving the hardware just because it's aging, but the solution itself just continues to work, and there's minor changes to it here and there. But how do you put a price on that? This is a solution that is kind of the heart and soul of this business. A very profitable business. Yeah, sure. I would love to have a little annuity in there, right? But can you imagine me having that conversation 12 years ago? Or now, can I go back and actually knock on the door? Hey,
Right. Yeah. And if you want, if they were requesting that it be recreated or something, or, drastically improved, you'd have to come back. Well, you've been running this for 12 years. It's kind of been, completely right. Necessary for your business. Your business is making this much, and then figuring out what percentage is due to the software. It's a lot of work, and granted, it can be done. There's a lot of people that do this sort of thing, and it is a great way to, bring in some pretty high-paying clients, I suppose. But it certainly is a different way to think. And
I think you're right. And I mentioned before that I'm trying to kind of get away from doing as much client-based project work as I have been in the past, and I just feel like it's time to explore some options. And really, that's one of the other reasons I ended up looking at Xojo. I really want to get into possibly doing software as a service, and also being able to really provide different types of solutions for clients. It's consulting is a difficult. You can make a lot of money doing this kind of work, but at the same time, you can really wear yourself out. And I guess, to kind of sum up the value pricing side of the conversation, it's part of our conversation. I guess at the end of the day, I kind of question whether it's worth it, because, suppose that you and I are bidding on a project. We've both been contacted by the same prospect, and I'm, hemming and hawing because, hey, I need to learn more about what you're doing. Let's have a value pricing conversation. And they're, I'm trying to explain to them and educate them on what that is. And here you are, you just say, look, I think it's going to take me 20 hours to develop it. Here's my hourly rate. Who are they going to go with? I think they're just going to say, hey, Paul, let's just do this. This guy over here, he's crazy. And I guess
it's taking too long. Yeah. And it's certainly the project scale probably does weigh into this a bit. Have you ever heard of a consultant, not in the software industry anyway? Alan Weiss. You ever heard?
Yes.
Yeah,
Read some of his books.
Yeah, I have a lot of his books. He's a big value pricing kind of guy, but he mostly does, high end and true consulting, where he goes into a business and he offers them advice on how they should be doing things. And I think perhaps something like that might be a lot easier to do value pricing with than like a coding project.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And I have read his books, and it really he's I think probably one of the best persons or people to read if you're interested in value pricing, because he does lay it out very well, and he's made a mint doing what he does. But yeah, I think you're right. At the end of the day, there's a big difference between being a consultant and being a developer, and sometimes those things overlap and they like dovetail into each other. But yeah, I think it goes back to, I think value pricing works sometimes and not all the time. And when it comes to development, I'm still kind of not convinced.
Yeah. And that's eventually where I ended up, is just that, I think for development, it's not going to work in most cases. And it's not worth the effort to try and kind of fit that square peg in the round hole thing, and risk alienating customers and not getting work. And so I ended up, I tried a few of those early on, and then, eventually I was like, no.
Well, it's funny because, in any given week, as a matter of fact, this week alone, I've already quoted a job that was hourly and a fixed price job, no value based bids yet so far this week. But I'm all over the place with it. I have not. It depends. I have to kind of gauge the project, have to gauge the client, and I don't even have like a cheat sheet, okay, if I have a good rapport with the client, I'm going to go down this path, or if it's a short project. I've also, and I've got some links to this, I'll send them to you for the show notes, but there are tools online for like actually helping you figure out what to charge on a project that take into account things like how difficult is the client to work with, and, is this going to look good on your portfolio?
Really?
There's so many other factors that I think, it's easy to kind of laugh them off, but I think that when you are bidding these projects, I would assume that you probably ran into this too. Subconsciously, you're thinking this.
Oh yeah, there's certainly, there's projects that, I knew I didn't want that badly, and I might like jack up the rate on them a lot because, I was okay if I didn't get them, but if I did get them, well, at least I'm being well paid for this one.
That's what you think, right? I've been burned by that too.
Yeah, and I certainly have been burned by that. But I've done that, and I try. I would not do that again if I had to. But you think that makes sense at the time, and
right. Yeah, I don't know. I think the hardest thing for me to learn in all the years I've been doing what I do is learning to say no and to go with my gut. Like when a project comes along and it doesn't feel quite right. Being okay with saying, I think I'm going to pass on this, and trying to do it in a way that's diplomatic and, politically correct. And
right. Yeah. That's a skill in and of itself.
It really is.
All right. Well, that's been great talking to you about that. As I say, when I listened to that podcast of yours, I was like, oh, man, I got to talk to Tim about this, get his perspective on it.
Yeah. I don't know whether to tell your listeners to check that out or not, because they might just end up as confused as I am. No, but seriously, if you are interested in it, the Art of Value podcast is really fantastic. And Kirk's done just a fantastic job. He's only been doing that since, I think, the fall. And boy, has he had some amazing people on a show. So,
I'll definitely include links to his podcast so you can check that out if you're interested. And certainly the one with you was it's just under an hour. It's a quick listen, and it was certainly interesting to hear these things. And certainly, if you're going to be doing consulting, having all this information is always useful, even if you don't end up using it. It can be very helpful, just in general, to help you figure out, what you want to do, how you want to price things, projects you want to take, that sort of stuff. Well, Tim, I want to thank you for being on XojoTalk. Great
Thanks
having you. Yeah, my pleasure. It's great having people that are new to Xojo on the podcast and getting a different perspective on things. And I want to remind everyone, we did talk about it earlier in the podcast, but our XDC, Xojo Developer Conference, is coming up the end of April. You want to go there. You want to, if you're interested in Xojo at all, that's the place to go. You're going to hear from people that know Xojo amazingly well, and not just us here that work at Xojo. There's a lot of people that know Xojo really well that are going to be there, and you get to talk with them, and you get to see sessions, and it's just fun. Us people that work at home and are alone with our cats, sometimes it's good to get away and actually be around other like-minded people and, socialize. So it can be quite fun. So I look forward to seeing those of you that are already coming, and I look forward to more of you saying, you know what, I need to be there. All right. Thanks again, Tim.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Stay tuned for our next podcast where we'll talk with Tim Hare. Tim is a frequent poster in the Xojo forums, and he's going to tell us how he rebuilt all of the apps used by his company using Xojo.